Good evening and welcome to tonight's installment of the Kuhn Academy, where we are not just learning history, we're making history. Okay, today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the Nullification Crisis involving Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. So as you've already read, Andrew Jackson is elected president in 1828 after the corrupt bargain in 1824 in which he lost. And you heard that catchy song there at the beginning. You can catch the entire version of that song on YouTube, as you can see it linked on my Moodle page. All right, so the tariff of abominations is what causes something known as the Nullification Crisis, which is one of the hallmarks of Andrew Jackson's presidency and also one of the precursors to the Civil War. Okay, and what you have to remember is back in this time period, 1810s, 1820s, the only forms of revenue for the U.S. government is excise taxes, which we should already know are taxes on goods made within the United States, and tariffs, which are taxes on exports. There is no income tax or property tax that we know of. Okay, so in 1816, a protective tariff was passed by Congress. This is after the War of 1812. That tariff is meant to encourage American industry. Okay, so if making foreign goods cost more, it's going to make American goods cheaper, which will make people more likely to buy it. Okay, they increased in 1824 and then again in 1828 to try and generate more revenue and keep protecting American businesses. The other thing you have to remember is American businesses are far inferior to the British businesses because of how successful the Industrial Revolution had been over there. They had a much greater head start than America did. Okay, so the South gets angry, starting to raise the price of the cheap cloth, and it raises the export price of cotton. Now, there is no tax on exports, because remember that from the Constitution, but when cotton is exported to Europe, they're jacking up their tariffs in return for the tariffs that America is jacking up on them. Okay, so cotton is going up in price, okay, which is really upsetting the Southerners, making it much more difficult for them to do business, if you will. Okay, moving along, okay? All right, so Calhoun, all right, is the vice president of the United States under Jackson, okay? He was he actually won in that election of 1824, he went for the VP in 1824, and in 1828 is running again, is chosen by Jackson, all right? He called the tariff of abominations. Now, he's a South Carolinian. He's a very wise but very ornery old man there in South Carolina. And he says the tariff is disgusting and loathsome, okay? So abominations, that's kind of like, think of the abominable snowman, just this big, bad, evil guy. That's kind of how he thought this tariff was. It was horrible for the country, and it was just a abomination to have this tariff hurting the South Carolina economy. Now, Jackson is the president who has to enforce this tariff, so his VP not liking it, not too good of a thing. All right? So it leads to the Nullification Crisis, where Calhoun comes up with a theory called nullification. Now, this word is already on our word wall because we learned about this in, yes, pause your video if you know it and turn and tell your neighbor, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, in which Jefferson and Madison nullified the Alien and Sedition Acts. So Calhoun comes up with this theory saying that a federal law conflicts with a state law. South Carolina didn't want to collect the tariff. They thought it was going to hurt their economy, hurt their business. Okay? So his argument is we don't have to follow this. We're going to nullify the law or not follow the tariff in South Carolina, which would obviously encourage investment and trade with that state since you don't have to pay a tariff there. Okay? His argument was that since the states were the ones to ratify the Constitution, they approved it. Right? They could also declare laws unjust. This is kind of like secession that we're going to get into later on in the Civil War. Okay? But he's saying that the states have this right because it's not in the Constitution to use a protective tariff, so therefore it's unconstitutional, and the states can reject that law if they choose not to. Virginia and Kentucky did it. Why can't we? Okay? Congress passed another tariff in 1832. All right? Was still deemed unacceptable by South Carolina. They felt it was too high and not conducive to their business. It was hurting their trade, making their imports cost too much, and making their exports not as profitable as England and other countries were retaliating. Okay? Moving along, this is our last slide here. Okay, South Carolina declares the tariff null and void. They threaten to secede from the government. All right, when we secede, we break away. Okay, so they wanted to break away from the Union, like we saw at the Hartford Convention, or did not see, according to Clark and the textbook. Secede is when we try to break away. I do not see secede on the word wall anywhere, so anybody named Taylor, or any other name for that matter, may come in and put secede on the word wall tomorrow for some extra points. And make sure you get on me to put those extra points in the grade book. I haven't really been doing that, okay? But we want to make sure we know what secede means. It happened in the Hartford Convention. It happens in the Nullification Crisis, and it's going to happen at the start of the Civil War also, okay? So Jackson responds to that threat of secession with what's called a force bill, which essentially is passed by Congress, giving him the authority to use force against South Carolina if they are not going to collect the tariff. Okay, you essentially have a civil war about to happen here. Okay, he sends troops to the South Carolina border to threaten them. If you don't follow the tariff, you are going to have an invasion. Jackson personally volunteered to lead the troops. He is the commander-in-chief, so he can do that. All right. It would look a little awkward with Barack Obama leading troops into, say, Texas to enforce the health care bill, but that's kind of the same scenario. Certain states are trying to nullify President Obama's health care bill, and they happen to be in the South. That's that old thing we say about history. It always tends to kind of repeat itself here, okay? So South Carolina does back off. Henry Clay comes in, works out a compromise, okay, gets the tariff to gradually be reduced, okay, not right away, but there'll be gradual reduction, okay, by Henry Clay. All right, and that's going to avert a civil war. That's the second of his great compromises. He worked on the Missouri Compromise. He works on this tariff compromise. Okay, this is after Calhoun resigns. All right, in disgust, obviously, because him and Jackson cannot get along. And then there'll be a compromise of 1850 Henry Clay will orchestrate as well. Okay, so we got to know Henry Clay as the great compromiser. All right, to conclude, all right, when this force bill is passed and Jackson sends the troops down, crisis gets averted, South Carolina accepted, everybody lives happily ever after. South Carolina, in typical fashion, because Southerners like to kind of get the last word in, they decide to nullify the force bill, essentially saying that law doesn't apply in South Carolina. Doesn't really mean anything, but it was kind of South Carolina's little dig at the at Andrew Jackson and the North for essentially forcing them to abide by this tariff. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll talk in class on Friday about this and many other things. And thanks for listening to the Kuhn Academy, where we are not just learning history, we're making history.